Son actually had made
Oh,
that
wow.
picture behind
Well,
me there.
welcome to everybody on YouTube now. We're just starting our wonderful discussion today. Welcome to anybody out there. We hope you're all safe and sound. And remember, if you ever want to join us on Zoom and you want to participate, you're always welcome. And this is nice because this way it stays recorded and we can just go right on into it. Good morning, Noel. Good morning, Stuart and Sheila. Good morning, Rena, Jeff, and Flossie. Good morning, Larry. Good morning. I think that's our group this morning so far. Excellent. I love Larry's painting back there. That's kind of cool. It's a nice thing to have on your backdrop. You're right. So this morning we're going to do the last of our 3 parts on women and Judaism. And then next week, I think Larry or Stuart proposed that we talk about Purim, which is great because one of the women we're talking about today is Esther. So that may be something to think about. Also, we will have a Purim spiel coming up. It's 2 weeks from Friday, or is it a week from Friday? Yeah, 2 weeks from Friday. And so everybody will be invited. Anybody wants to participate, let me know. So good morning. Today we're going to talk about biblical women. Did anybody have any questions about the previous biblical women we talked about? I answered all the questions again. Yes. 2 points for me. So this week we're going to talk about 3 women. Unlike previous weeks where we talked about women who have had a major impact but did not have a lot of text time or a lot of lines in the Bible, we're going to talk about 3 women, 2 of whom did have a lot of time in the Bible. In fact, we're going to talk first about the 2 women who have books named after them, which is a mighty feat to say the least. Both of these books are used for holiday. In fact, one entire holiday is set in the book or is based upon the book itself. So of course, we're talking about Esther and Ruth. And at the end, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about Hannah, who has become a very well-known person, even though she's only found in 1 chapter of 1 book. So I think we've all heard of Ruth and Esther. Esther, we're going to be hearing a lot about in the next weeks because obviously Purim is coming up. We got a Purim spiel and Megillah reading, the whole Megillah we'll be doing. And Ruth, the book is used and read during Shavuos. So it's also a very prominent book. Both are interesting in that women are the central figures, or at least one of them. And Ruth, 2 women are pretty much the central figures with one man who is an important figure, but not central, probably because he's not found throughout the book. So let's go ahead and start. And I know you all know a lot about these books, so anything you have to say, please. But we're going to start off with Ruth, which is personally important to me because my grandmother was Ruth, who I never met, and I am named for her. So if I was a girl, I would have been named Ruth. And her story, of course, is a very prominent story in many ways, mostly because it is truly the longest story in which probably a woman, or in this case, women, are the central figures from the very beginning to the end. There are no male figures that equate. If there was a nomination for Academy Awards for biblical books, there would be no man in the actor category. There would only be a man in the supporting actor category. So there would not be a lead actor category because Boaz, although certainly is essential, he is not the central focus. The focus almost entirely is on Ruth and her mother-in-law, of course, Naomi. Now, the basic story we'll talk about, some of you may know about it, some of you may not. It's a really fabulous story, really interesting because we understand that women had a lot of difficulty finding any sense of equality. And even though they received more of it in the Jewish world, it still wasn't anything compared to what we see today. So in the basic terms, Naomi is living in what is today Jordan with her husband who has no lines, her 2 sons, and her 2 daughters-in-law. So they're living there, working, presumably, apparently her husband and her 2 sons-in-law did something wrong, and they're both killed by God, thus leaving 3 single women with no kids. So Naomi, of course, turns to the two daughters-in-law and says, you can go back home. Remember, in ancient society, if you married somebody who was Hebrew, you pretty much became a Hebrew. She says, go back home, go back with your people, start over. Basically, you still have families you can go to. One does, the other one does not, and that is Ruth. Ruth says, I will follow you. Where you lie, I will lie. It's a very famous verse. Where you go, I go. And so she says, no, I'm going to follow you. Does she follow her because she wants to stay Jewish? Doesn't say that. Does she follow her because she's worried about the survival of her mother-in-law, who really has no family back home, apparently, except for extended family, perhaps mostly in her husband's family. So we don't know why Ruth does it, or she just dedicated because they're friends. Ruth and Naomi go back, and what is very important to understand is Ruth is going with Naomi to an uncertain future. Naomi does not know what's going to happen when she gets back. She doesn't have a lot of money. She does have some extended family that will hopefully take care of her. She has no children, which really limits her standing in the community. And Ruth may not even be considered Jewish at this point because her husband is dead and she has no kids, and she's from a Moabite family. So both of these women together unite and go back to a very uncertain future. Now, the book is only 4 chapters long, but it's very condensed, as you can imagine. And when we see them return, Naomi becomes, which would be obviously what many of us would under those circumstances, very depressed, more of a shut-in of her own accord, except when they go glean the fields. Ruth is going and gleaning the fields, which is permissible under the law there. Anybody who is unable to afford food, you're able to glean. In her case, she also may work in the fields. And during this time, the relationship becomes a little stronger as Ruth really takes more of a central focus and is in many ways the caregiver of Naomi, who is really distraught. However, Ruth has a benefactor because Boaz, who is a distant relative of Naomi's husband, tells all of the men to leave her alone, don't pester her, because he's worried because she has no attachment to anybody, which may mean that she is someone who needs protection because she doesn't have a connection, and she may be considered someone who is an outsider, someone who is not Jewish or not a Hebrew. And so what she does is she discusses it a little bit with her mother-in-law, and as you can guess, her mother-in-law is pretty excited about this because marrying into the family helps Naomi as well as Ruth. How does it help Naomi? We're not 100% sure, but we all know about the Levirate marriage, right? Everybody knows the Levirate marriage. If I marry a woman and I die, we don't have children, she is supposed to marry my brother. Now, my brother has the right to refuse, but that is what's supposed to happen. He has to refuse. So if Ruth marries a distant relative of Naomi's husband, does the Levirate marriage law still need to be enacted? And even at the end of the book, we're unsure. But Boaz looks at Ruth and he falls in love as well. Now you got to remember, she sees him as a nice guy who's protected her, and he's wealthy and well respected. From his perspective, he is surprised that this pretty young woman would want to date him as opposed to the other young guys. So this leads us to believe that he's an older guy who's been single and has no kids, may never have decided to marry, his wife may have died. And so they go through a ceremony, or a very flirtatious couple of meetings while she's gleaning in the field, in which she ends up spending the night with him in a, when you're, I don't know what it's called, but when you're working the fields and you have the house that you stay in overnight, so you don't have to go all the way back. So you can just keep working immediately. Now, do they sleep together? It's unclear. My Bible professor, Mar Ashkenazi, in rabbinical school, who was an expert in Ruth, she was the main editor for the women's commentary. And so when we had to write an exegesis, a long basically paper looking at sections of the Bible from various perspectives, I took this scene from Ruth because she told me this would be a good scene to take. And she had explicitly said that they definitively did not have sex. It's in the Hebrew, it's obvious, she doesn't care what other people say. And so, of course, when I wrote my paper, being who I am, what did I say? I said, they seem to have had intercourse in my paper, which she was not thrilled about. And she threatened to not pass my paper, but she did in the end. If you're wondering if I was going to stand firm, if she said change it or I'll flunk you, would I have stand firm in my ideals? Absolutely not. I would have changed it in a second. I did not want to take the course again. So whether she did or didn't, Tamar Ashkenazi says she didn't. Obviously, she's a much greater sage than I am. So whatever it is, she did sneak out so that nobody saw them together to think that they might have had some sort of illicit relationship, because he is a man of honor. It's very important to him that he remain considered a man of honor. So that brings us to the 4th chapter. And you can imagine Naomi is thrilled to death. She's kind of woken up from her doldrums, and she is excited of this prospect that Ruth, who has taken it upon herself. Now, she didn't do anything wrong, but she definitely made it known that she was interested. And obviously, some people could take that the wrong way, but in today's world, it would not be a big deal. For instance, if a woman asks out a guy, it's just not a big deal. In those days, possibly it was presumptuous to flirt with someone, especially someone so much older and someone who you're gleaning his fields. But she definitely is proactive. But we have to understand, what did we talk about women previously? What was the power that women had if they were single and didn't have children? They had none, very little. So it was essential to be married and essential to have children. You can have boy children, even better, but it's essential to be married and have children. Your power is whatever your husband, unfortunately, usually decides your power is. And so what we see is this amazing woman decides to be proactive and doesn't seduce him. It's not like she's a harlot like Tamar. She's not pretending she's someone else. She's making her feelings known. And we also realize, and I think the Bible wants to make sure we understand what she's doing is not wrong, because when the Bible portrays Boaz, who is a presumably wealthy, respected, good-looking older man, which in ancient society probably meant he was 32, and he has a feeling of inferiority of some ways, that why would this beautiful woman want to date him as opposed to these young strapping guys? So he is not super confident or egotistical in his own viewpoint of himself. So they're making us understand that he's a man of valor, she's a woman of virtue, and what she's doing is not only okay, but legitimate and encouraged. So it's really a powerful statement by the Bible for some sort of women's rights, or at least women's power, which is very rare. Now, we don't know if this Levirate thing works or is important. It doesn't seem to tell us definitively. Naomi does not know. So what does Boaz do? He does a very clever thing, because he is a man of honor. In chapter 4, he calls a meeting of all of the male of age relatives of Naomi's dead husband. They're at the gate. He calls them all together. If you're looking to understand what's going on, it's a very powerful thing, because it's one of those things when you're watching a TV show and the detective says, I have a plan. And then as he's about to say it, he whispers it to somebody else because they want to make it a secret. They don't want, and so we don't know why he's calling everybody. He calls everybody, says basically, I want to marry this woman. I am not first in line. Does anybody claim levirate marriage ahead of me? Now, we don't understand if he's saying it in a nice way, pleading. Is he saying it like, if anybody else wants to take her, great, please do? Or is he saying, I want this woman, I dare anyone to say they can have her ahead of me, even though legally you might? We don't know which way it's going, but we do know nobody says that it is their right to marry her, so he marries her. And basically they declare that their first child is going to be really Naomi's child, since she has lost a child. Now remember, levirate marriage is, if I marry you, the child goes to my dead brother. It doesn't anything about the child goes to the wife of the dead father-in-law. So they're changing and taking this levirate marriage thing to a different level we've never seen before. We've never seen anything like this. And it may not even be legitimate. It just may be that Boaz is such a man of honor. He wants to make sure everybody sees this is up and up. Perhaps it's because he's marrying somebody who's much younger. You know, he's probably 32 and she's 17. And so, usually you get married at, 19 or whatever. But, and so he wants to make it all the up and up. And so they get married. And the first child they have will be Peretz, who of course will be a descendant of King David. And so we will see that King David comes from the line of Tamar, remember the harlot, and Ruth, the convert. So Ruth is the poster woman for people who go through conversion. Now, obviously today there's a whole process. Back then you married and you were converted, but it shows that Ruth, who is a Moabite, does not only convert, but she is a powerful, virtuous woman that we can name an entire book after. And again, there's only one other woman who a book is named after, and she is a woman who was born Jewish. We'll talk about her in a second. It's a very different viewpoint. So any questions about Ruth and Boaz and Naomi, anything about what's going on in this book? It is a really easy book to read. There's only 4 chapters. And so, it takes only a few minutes, but it's really a beautiful, it's more like what's the movie? Thelma and Louise story with a good ending. Larry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the levirate. That kind of implies that it came from the tribe of Levi. And how widespread was it, though, throughout the other tribes? Was it only in particular for that one tribe?
No, I believe it's a different root. And so it has nothing to do with the Levites, I don't believe. But maybe it does. Wait, actually, let me see how it's spelled in Hebrew. I'll remind myself. It is for all tribes. It has nothing. It's not just for, it's not just for the tribe of Levi. In fact, of course, these people here are the tribe of Judah.
That's what I was wondering.
So it has nothing to do with, it may have been founded by the tribe of Levi, but let me see how it's spelled. I forgot how it's spelled in Hebrew. But it has not, it's for all men, all Jewish men.
It's not a Torah commandment.
It is. It is found in Exodus, that it is one of the rules. However, it is not a command. If my brother dies and they have no children, his wife is supposed to marry me, but I have an out. I spit and throw a shoe. It's a whole ceremony, and then I'm out. So I am not beholden to this rule. I am basically it's one of those things that say I have to say no. It's there's rules in life that that are automatically yes, but you have to say no to. And other rules that So in this case, they're automatically married unless the brother says no. So now this is how the levirate marriage differs here. these other relatives are not the brother. So if any of them were if this was an actual Levirate marriage, when she arrived, she would be automatically given to one of these people as a wife, and they would have to say no. And then they would go down the line. But we've only seen the Levirate marriage with siblings, not with cousins, or uncles. So this is more of a theory. I don't know if it means that they actually had taken Levirate marriage to the upteenth degree, or is this a special case, or are they just showing Boaz wants to make sure it's up and up? Because when they arrive in the land, when they move back to Israel, to the land of Judah, she's not married off right away or even offered to anybody. And in fact, they talk about her starting to date. So it's a really good question. And but no, it's not. It's for all.
Is this the only example of Levirate marriage in the Jewish Bible? In all of the books?
No, there are a couple others. There are a couple others, yeah. It's not prevalent, though. It's not as prevalent as you think. I think this was and many people believe this was an assumed thing, that it may have been done all the time, obviously, but there's not that. That's maybe why there's not that many recordings of it. This is the most famous one because it's so different.
The first one is pretty early in Genesis. It's actually refers to when they're talking about Judah's son. And there's a debate about
Tamar.
Judah. I think that's the one where Judah refuses to give his son in Levirate marriage, actually his first two sons, and the marriage falls to a third son. So this comes up very early, and it comes up as just from Judah, not from Levi.
Yeah, and that's the story of Judah and Tamar, which is the same line of this.
Right, and that's the first mention of in Torah, I think.
And it's important. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it's important to realize that the Judah Tamar story predates the Levirate marriage rules from Exodus. So it was probably a rule that was being followed by people everywhere before Jews even got it. Sorry, Larry?
I was just going to ask, how many generations? What is the genealogy then between David and Ruth?
David and Ruth, it's considered very close. I think Boaz, Peretz, and then I think it's one more person, and then Jethro, and then David.
So it's almost like a grandmother.
I think Boaz is the great-great-grandfather. Yeah, let me check the line on that. Let's see here. Let's see here. I can look that up, Rob. I'm just going to think about that. And if you hear any typing, that's just because I'm playing with my hands. I know the Davidic line by heart. I would never look at Wikipedia to see how far down it goes. That's starting with David. All right. All right. Does anybody know? Let's see your line. Okay. Let's see. Let's see here 1 second. See if I'm missing somebody. All right, see here. Boaz. Okay, so Boaz to Peretz. Okay, I'll have to look it up later. I don't remember. I think it's all right. Peretz became the father of
you can do
Hezron.
It later. That's all right.
Hezron became the father. Okay, Boaz. It's Obed. Okay, Obed's the name. I'm sorry, Peretz is the name of Tamar and Judah's kid. Theirs is Obed, so it's Obed, then Jethro. So it's actually, I added one person in there. It's Boaz, Obed, Jethro, David. So it's just great-grandfather. All right, Rena and then Sheila.
What if the person, there's one brother and the woman becomes a widow of his brother, but the brother's married?
Remember, that's an excellent point. The Levirate marriage in the Bible, up through a certain time period, men could have multiple wives. So let's say I'm married, and that's a great point. I'm married and I have, and this is where a lot of the issues come into play. You can understand the difficulty because of the eldest son and who's going to get what. I'm married and I have 3 sons. My brother dies childless, so I marry his widow. I have a son with her. Now that son is considered my brother's son.
Mhm.
What does that mean for me? It means my brother's inheritance was going to go probably to me, and I'd be taking care of his wife. Now my brother's inheritance goes to the son, and I get buck bisque.
Oh,
So you can see. Also, let's say I have 2 girls, or I get married to my brother's wife, and I have a boy with her before with my wife. Does my brother's wife's son, my firstborn, get all my stuff and my brother's stuff? Is he my firstborn and my brother's firstborn? You can see the inheritance issues are, plus if my wife doesn't get along with this other wife, because you often when I want to get a second wife, I will probably talk to my first wife and say, are you guys going to get along? And so there's a lot of issues. And what if I didn't get along with my brother? What if we were alienated and he stole from me? I mean, there is a lot of issues. So we can see how it's important that I have the right to say no. Otherwise, there could be a lot of issues. Sheila.
okay.
Now later, obviously, men were only allowed to have 1 wife at a time. So Levirate marriage would no longer be suited, or would not be able to be enacted if I was already married.
Okay, as Larry said, I'm sure this wasn't the only Levirate marriage that occurred. What made Ruth so special that the book of Ruth was written about her? Is it because her children were descendants of David? So the book was written much later on? But what made her so special?
That is another great question. That is a great question. Is she so special because she's a terrific human being? She's strong. She embodies everything a Jewish person would want. Somebody strong, fearless, dedicated, honorable. Or is it because her great-grandson is going to be King David? It's probably a little of both. But certainly the Davidic line is important. And the tribe of Judah wants to make sure that that line is essential. One of the thoughts, or one thing it could be, is you always want your tribe to be in the best light. You want your king to be in the best light. King David is our king. He's the greatest king of all time. We want to make him the best king. But everybody has skeletons in their closet. What are the skeletons that David has in his closet? Well, his great-grandmother was a convert. She was a Moabite. So, oh, but wait a minute. Here's a story about his great-grandmother, Ruth, who, even though was a Moabite, was this incredible lady who was more of a dedicated Jew than anyone born into Judaism. That certainly could be one of the reasons, as you mentioned, Sheila, to make sure the light of David remains bright.
So when was the book written?
Oh, when was the book written? That is a good question. Now, the setting of the book obviously is the 11th century. That is probably early 11th century to mid 11th century. It's easy to remember when David ruled. King David, just think of the year 1000 BCE. So David rules in 1000 BCE. Obviously, he's born 25 years earlier. And so this is the great-grandmother. So we're talking 1090, 1100, 1080, somewhere in there probably. It is not written by that time period. It is almost certainly written obviously later, because if it was written that time period, it would be the oldest book we have. Ruth, I believe, is dated to post-biblical, I mean, not post-exile. Let's see here, what they have here. Let's see if I can get a date. I would say it's probably in the 5th century. But I have to look that up when they, again, there's no exact dates given because obviously we don't know. Okay, here we go. Let's see what I find what the scholars say. Yeah, 6th to 4th century, most people think. So that's when most of it is done. Now, why 6th to 4th century? It's because if it's post-exile, you're in exile, you want King David to still be prominent. So you start writing books about King David and his line and making sure that, and so that's probably when it is written. Sorry, Larry.
Yeah, but in the chronology of this of the story, Ruth accompanies her mother-in-law and decides to accompany her mother-in-law before she meets Boaz, right?
Yep.
So she has made the commitment already,
right,
to basically follow Judaism even before the Levirate marriage story comes into play.
exactly.
And I thought that was kind of the main purpose of the story, that, you know, that she's willing to follow her mother-in-law in the commitment.
That would be a lot of people, including me, would think that would be the best answer because they want somebody who's that amazing. And that it just happens to be she's an ancestor of King David. It's probably a combination of both those, that this is an amazing story and it shows that David comes from an amazing lineage of Jewish by born men and really top-notch intellectual and strong women. And it's probably a combination of all that.
Yeah, just thinking back to the importance of the lineage of David, and even in the Christian Bible, where I remember that in one of the books, one of the early books, where they're trying to appeal, whether the books of Mark or Matthew, I forget which one, where they're trying to appeal to the Jews to convert. They basically tried to show that Jesus was from the line of David, and they go through the whole thing, and they have what they call, as I remember, the Jesse tree. You know, where Jesse was the father of David. And then you could see this in a lot of the stained glass work and a lot of the medieval cathedrals where people couldn't read, but they could see the Jesse tree, that, you know, David came from or Jesus came from the line of David.
And that is a purely Christian thing. The line of David for Jews ends around the year 500 BCE. The last person who's mentioned that we know of who's a descendant of David is a guy named Zerubbabel, who we know very little about. We know he's living in the late 6th century and then he disappears. So it's very understandable that the Babylonians and Persians were not excited about having a descendant of David. Now, the Persians allowed the Jews to go back and resettle the land, and one guy who's a line of David, Zerubbabel, went with them, and then he disappears. You imagine the Persians did not, they gave autonomy to the Jews, but they probably didn't want any of the descendants of kings to be around, because that might give the Jews ideas to rebel. And so almost all the line was probably left in Babylon or Persia, or killed, that we know of. Now, were there descendants of David around? Certainly very possible, but we have no record of any of them. So I mean, nobody today can tell us what tribe they're. So if anybody says, I'm from the tribe of Ephraim, there is absolutely no way to prove that. The only tribe that we know of that's still around is the tribe of Levi, with people who are Cohens or Levites are from the tribe of Levi. What is the proof we have? Now, I know there's been some studies on the priestly gene, but for instance, I'm a Levite. Anybody here a Levite or a Cohen? Okay, so I'm a Levite. How do I know I'm a Levite? How do I know I come from this ancient line of a high priest?
Your father told you.
Exactly. My father told me. That's the only reason I know. And how does he know? Did he get documentation? No, his father told him. So it is a word of mouth thing. It is very easy to move to another country and you think, well, I'll have a better chance to get a job. I'll be more respected if I say I am a Levite. So Am I really Levite? Who knows? Possibly. But I do know my grandfather and my father and probably my great-grandfather believed we were Levites, but to prove it is impossible. So there are nobody who's alive today can prove which tribe they come from, probably, unless you're from the tribe of Levite. And even then, you'd have to go back and prove it from this day, probably to sometime in the 8th century BCE, because tribal Judaism ends around the late 8th century. So I'd have to be able to have a line from me going all the way back to the year 850 BCE to prove that I'm in the tribe of Ephraim. And that is impossible. I mean, it's just not, it's not, you literally have to have, people would be writing this down, and regular people weren't doing that. So if you did have that, if I had those documents right now on me, you know what I would do with them? I would sell them and then retire with all that money, because that would be worth millions. It would be worth tens of millions of dollars to have that kind of proof. We have no proof of any kind. I would, of course, my father would have said, never sell this. This is our line. This is our history. And I would have said, you bet, Father, I will never sell it, knowing that I was lying to my dad 100%. But no, I'm kidding. But yeah, there's no such thing. In fact, most Jews can't even prove their lineage past the late 19th century, let alone 4,000 years ago. Any other questions? Rena?
Well, again, the same theory that I'm an Israelite, which is the low man on the totem pole. So could I switch tribes?
You cannot. Now, who are the Israelites? The Israelites are everybody else.
Yeah.
You could be from the tribe of Judah, the most powerful tribe, or you could be from the tribe of Manasseh, or the tribe of, one of the or Reuben, one of the least powerful tribes. It's impossible to know. What happened? The reason this happened is the tribes were divided, but in the 8th century, the Assyrians defeat the 10 tribes in the north, and some of those Jews are lost, but a lot of them moved to the south and just kind of combined with the tribe of Judah and mixed together, and there's no more tribal. There was probably a generation where you said, I'm a tribe of Judah and you're not, I'm better than you. But we know what happens here. And within one generations where I'm not allowed to marry a East European Jew who just moved to America, but my son, who's from strong German descent, marries a woman who is from Romanian descent. I was not allowed to do it, but my son is. It's not a big deal. And certainly my grandson. Today, nobody cares if you marry unless you're ultra-Orthodox, nobody cares if my descended from a German Jewish family or a Russian Jewish family. So
I thought the 10 lost tribes moved to Ethiopia.
That is one of the thoughts. That's what some would say in Ethiopia, some would say Khazar, some would say there's a lot of thoughts, and only a few of us know the answer.
Yeah.
So, all right.
They have the original Torah there.
That, not the original 10 Commandments. Yeah.
10 Commandments, yes.
Yeah, there is a belief that the Ark of the Covenant was taken during a raid. Well, the actual belief that it was taken during this raid by an Egyptian pharaoh in the 10th century is probably very legitimate. There's a very good chance that's when the Ark of the Covenant was taken. And some would say it went into Ethiopia, is buried under temple there. Some say it went into this mysterious city that was covered by the desert and was found by this incredible archaeologist named Indiana Jones. So, but nobody knows where the Ark of the Covenant. And again, if I knew where the Ark of the Covenant was, I would probably tell somebody. All right. Any other questions? Let's go on. We'll take a little bit of time for Esther, and we're going to talk. And if we want, since we're almost finished, we only have like 10, 15 minutes, we can talk about Hannah and then save Esther for next week and use her and just talk about Purim. Because Purim is a really interesting, you have the book of Esther, but then you have the holiday of Purim, which is in a really interesting and rare a holiday that is a very creative holiday that we have. So why don't we talk a little bit about Hannah? Not much is talked about Hannah in terms of, I mean, there's not much about her in the Bible. Hannah, if you don't know who she is very famous because she's the mother of Samuel. And Samuel obviously is a very important character. Some would say could be number 2 to Moses. I mean, he's up there with Abraham and David. So he has 2 books named after him, obviously. So Hannah is his mother. So, and she is only mentioned again in the first chapter, I believe, of the book of Samuel. I think it may extend to the second chapter. So the first 2 chapters, and then never mentioned again. But she has a unique history and a unique presence in the world today that some of you may know, some of you may not know why. Now, first of all, she is the wife of Elkanah, who was one of these nondescript men, kind of like the husband of Naomi and the husband of Ruth. So she's married to him, but Elkanah, unlike the husband of Naomi and Ruth, who we know nothing about and seem to have been maybe nefarious characters, Elkanah is a really good guy. He's a nice guy. He's got 2 wives, very legitimate at the time. His first wife, Hannah, is the one it's her first wife. He's the one he's most in love with. And she has no children. His second wife, Peninnah, does have children. Now, it doesn't say he hates her. He just says he prefers Hannah. And as we know, in ancient times, it was very common for men to have multiple wives. I don't support it, but mostly because of the need to have as many children as possible. And a lot of times women died in childbirth, which we all know. So Hannah obviously is very upset that she doesn't have kids. We don't know if she's being persecuted by Peninnah. We have no idea. We just know that Peninnah has kids. For all we know, Peninnah was a really nice lady as well. This is not an anti-Peninnah section of the Bible. Elkanah, though, understands his first wife's, or we assume his first wife's, conundrum. He loves her. She's his first wife. She should be the top wife in the family, but she's got no kids, which means she seems powerless to others. But he loves her. She's not powerless in his eyes. So he gives her half of his stuff. So he's treating her as she deserves her full share, whereas Elkanah shares her full share with her children. So Hannah, obviously appreciates this, but probably feels guilty. Who knows if Peninnah's being nice about it, but there's still going to be that connection issue that Peninnah has children, and even if she's not lording it over Hannah, it's still obvious to everyone in the community. Everybody knows. So she goes to the house of Ellie. Ellie is a high priest. Now this is in Shiloh. So this is before the Ark of the Covenant has been brought to Jerusalem and before the temple is built. So the Ark of the Covenant is in Shiloh. There's a sanctuary there. And she goes to his house, or his, not his house, to the temple, probably where the area where he's staying, or to the area before you go. And she is crying, praying to God, saying, God, please give me a child. If you give me a child, I will dedicate him to God. I will make him a Nazarite, which is not the rule of Nazarite. We'll talk about that in a second. And she's crying, and Ellie tells this drunken woman to go home and stop running around drunk because she's shaking so much. She says, I'm not drunk. I am just very upset that I don't have a child. I promise if I have a child, she'll be dedicated to God. And so as circumstance will happen, she does get pregnant. She ends up having 6 kids in total. We don't know if her son will get first priority over Peninnah's son. Legally, even though Peninnah's a second wife, if she has a son, her son would still have first son status over Hannah's first son, because it doesn't matter about preferred wives, it just matters who comes first. So, but it doesn't matter because he is basically given over to Ellie to be raised in the house of the priesthood. So, and he of course becomes Samuel the Great. Now, is he a priest? No, but is he living there? Yes. So he becomes kind of like an attaché to the priest, some very important person in the house of the high priest, because obviously he is very gifted and he's very respected. So why does his mother become so well known? Because obviously she's in a few lines, that's it. She has one conversation with, well, later on, especially when the Hasidim come into play with the Baal Shem Tov in the 17th century, they bring this idea of this fervent belief that you have to show your emotions during prayer. So if you go, I'm sure we've all seen the Orthodox guys pray. How do they pray? They kind of pray how I sit, because I fidget. They pray like this. That's how they pray. They try and get their emotions out. They're putting their heart into prayer. That motion that they do is based upon Hannah. So her motioning and crying and to Ellie praying for a son was answered. She got, not only did she get a son, but she got Samuel the Great. I mean, she got the greatest person of his generation, a top 5 person in all of Judaism, maybe number 2. So if Hannah, a woman, could pray this way and get what she wants from the high priest, Ellie, in Shiloh, then we should emanate what she does and pray with fervor. And so that is why they do it. And so she has become venerated in multiple circles. Again, it's strange that she's venerated in the circle of ultra-Orthodox men, but she is. But she's also venerated as a strong woman who really wanted a son, but for the right, maybe the right reasons, we're not sure, but a woman who was seemingly powerless, but your dedication to God gave her power, and God answered her prayers. And again, we see, as is almost every single time, almost every single major female character has trouble having children, or at least when we discuss their children, they have trouble. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah. Tamar has issues with it, because so all of these people, all these women, and the Bible goes out of the way to try and support them. But in the end, the Bible usually supports them by saying, hey, they succeed. But one of the great things they succeed in doing is having kids, usually a man. So it's one of those ironies. But so Hannah is not a major character, but she becomes a very important one in Jewish history. Any questions? Now, it goes again to the question, by the way, of who is wife number 1? Who is child number 1? And this is a huge question in the Bible. In ancient society, it's the eldest son. And depending on the society, it's either the eldest son of the favorite wife or the eldest son overall. Judaism goes out of its way to say it's the eldest son of period. But Judaism loves to tell us that it's not essential that the eldest son is the most important one. It's not essential that the favorite wife is the important one. It's not essential that women, although it is essential that women have children, that women have power beyond having children. And so this is what we see throughout. So Samuel is not going to be the eldest son of his family. He's going to be the most prominent. Larry.
You had mentioned something about Hasidim, their method of praying. Did they also revive the idea of the Levirate marriage? I mean, I've seen it in so many, not so many, but in several movies and films about Hasidism. Are they actively practice it?
The Levirate marriage has been actively practiced since the inception of Judaism, we think. There has probably never been a time where it hasn't been part of the world. Now, has it been enacted? No, because men would just, the brother would say no. In the last 1,200 years for sure, Jews have mostly only had one wives. Men have only had one wives. In certain areas, like in Ethiopia, they may have had multiple. But the Levirate marriage has been a part of it from that time until today. It is still very popular in certain Orthodox circles. It would have probably been done in most of our ancestor circles in the 19th century in Europe. And again, not necessarily, I mean, the man would, the brother would have had to say no. We know it was done in our congregation. The most famous Levirate marriage in our country's history was at our congregation. I don't know if you know the
Who's
story.
that?
No, tell us.
It's a really interesting story. It's kind of funny. Mordechai Sheftel, you may have heard of, is
Where we have lunch.
yes, right. So he was a religious Jew. He was born in 1734 in Savannah. He becomes the highest ranking Jew in the military. We talk about him all the time. He had two sons, and Sheftel and Levi Sheftel. And Sheftel was a little bit off. He could have been just strange. He could have been what we might call today on the spectrum. He was a gifted lawyer, very prominent lawyer, but very strange. He's very famous from this in our part because, again, he served in the Revolutionary War. He was a child. He was 17 when he was captured. He wore his Revolutionary War outfit daily until he died in the 1840s. So if he came to Savannah, you would see a guy with this giant hat and a uniform from a war that finished 60 years earlier. So it'd be like somebody today wearing their World War II uniform every day. They're like dress colors, dress blues. So a very strange guy. So Mordechai set up his son Levi to get married to a woman from Charleston. Nice Jewish woman, was not from a religious family. She learns about this Levirate marriage thing and sees who her brother-in-law is going to be. So the Levirate marriage happens when your husband dies, right? Your husband dies, and then the brother has to say no. She does not want to wait for her husband to die. She forces her husband and her husband's brother to do a Levirate marriage before they're married. So then in that her brother-in-law will not marry her if her husband dies. So she does a premeditative Levirate marriage, forcing her brother-in-law to say no before she will even marry him.
Essentially, she had a prenup.
Exactly. She basically said, I'm not marrying your brother. And that has to be, I think it was in the actual ketubah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
if it was in the ketubah, it was in another document.
It was also very common in Europe to go the other way, where a husband who lost a wife would marry the wife's sister.
Yeah, that is.
As a matter of fact, I believe, we're not absolutely positive, but I believe, my grandfather had two wives, and it's our belief, one after the other, and it's our belief that the second wife was the sister of the first.
Yeah, I think that has been and I think a lot of societies is very common. It's not a law in Judaism, but I think it was considered good practice.
Yeah, and I think it's related to this whole idea of
I definitely
Levirate marriage.
It was. I don't know if it's ever been on the books. We can check the Talmud. It may actually be in the books as well in the Talmud. It's not biblical, but yeah, it is very often the case that you will do that because obviously you stay in the same family, you honor the deceased.
An obligation.
Yeah. So, plus it's easy. You're already there. You already know this person. And it still happens in the modern world today. I mean, you get to know your family, and if your wife, sister, somebody you like, and she dies, who knows what's going to happen. It looks a little peculiar to us today, but I think it's very much accepted.
Larry may be aware of this. When I was a kid, there was a very famous popular song, "I'm My Own Grandpa."
Really?
And the lyric of the song had that relationship developed.
Yeah, that was more of a hillbilly kind of thing. Where,
That's
you know,
right.
from
Well, that was
Arkansas,
exactly what they did.
Hey, wait a minute,
The song
Larry.
would have been called country music today.
You're calling my ancestors hillbilly, but it's okay.
No,
'cause
Arkansas, not Texas.
you're calling your
Arkansas.
ancestors hillbilly. You're calling every Jewish person's ancestors hillbilly at some point.
In
Because
the loving
95%
sense.
of us probably have
In the
family.
loving sense.
What?
Could you comment a little bit on the Nazarites?
Yeah, and it's an interesting case. We have no evidence of a Nazarite, a real Nazarite. We only have the evidence of two alternative Nazarites. Okay, let me give you the rule of Nazarite. It's important to understand the rule. A Nazarite is anybody. It's any regular Joe who's Jewish, who says, I'm going to be a Nazarite for 2 months. And for this 2 months, I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to cut my hair. Those are the two major obligations. I'm not going to touch a dead body. That's the third major obligation. And probably in other ways, I'm going to be more kosher. We don't know the other rules. So this is a commitment for a distinct amount of time. The priest ensured it was for amount of time because the priest did not want somebody being extra holy and competing with the priest. Because if anybody can say, I'm a lifelong Nazarite, I would compete with the priest for that jurisdiction. So it was a very regulated period of time where anybody could just say, I'm going to be a Nazarite. You know, it's like saying, I'm going to be a vegan for 2 months, protesting the way, you know, chicken or poultry are killed. And that's what a Nazarite was. However, we have no actual evidence of anybody ever doing this. The priest really did not want people doing it. So any priestly parts of the Bible are obviously not going to have this in it because they didn't like it. The 2 times we see the Nazarite used are with Samuel and anybody know the second? Samson, right. And both of them break the rules because it's a mother saying, my child will live as a Nazarite. Well, the Nazarite rule has nothing to do with the mother. It's not a lifelong thing. And a baby definitely can't be a Nazarite because a baby cannot say, I want to be a Nazarite. And plus, there are a lot of rules that babies don't follow because they're babies and they have to have certain foods and do certain things. So the only 2 Nazarites are Samuel and Samson. Now, Samuel's mother says, I'm going to leave him as a lifelong Nazarite. That is never said about Samuel. He's never been called a Nazarite. His mother says, I'm going to do this for him, but he never does it himself.
Did the Hasidim resurrect that idea as well with the cutting of the hair?
Yes. Now, the cutting of the hair, there's a lot of different things with that, but certainly the main the most important time we talk about hair cutting has to do with the Nazarite. The laws that they follow, cutting somebody at 3, are probably based on the Nazarite laws that are biblical. But Samuel's never a Nazarite. His mother says, I'm going to dedicate him as a Nazarite. The only person we have as a Nazarite is Samson, whose mother does the same thing, but Samson is called a Nazarite, which he is a terrible Nazarite. Why is he a terrible Nazarite? What is Samson famous for being? He's famous for being a warrior. And if he's a warrior and he's a good one, he's touching dead bodies all the time. He is like the best. He's like, he is the Black Knight. He beats everybody, nobody individually or as a team. He beats groups of men by himself. He kills them. He slaughtered a group of men of actual fighters with a lion bone from the lion he killed by his hands, something that Stuart and I, Larry, remember doing as our children ourselves when we were younger, but we struggled with it. It was a lot tougher for us than it was for Samson to kill that lion. So he is described as a lifelong Nazarite, which is never what it's supposed to be. Why do the priest and the writers who hated the Nazarite idea let him stand in the book? If they cover up all of their evidence of Nazarite, why do they not cover up Samson? Because Samson is a total failure. He is the biggest failure of all the judges. His job is to defeat the Philistines. Instead, he is captured and blinded. And yes, he kills a few as he dies, but he is a failure. He is his need for women allows a evil woman to trick him into revealing his most sacred secret. He is not a good role model. And that's why he's probably allowed to be a character and he wasn't scratched from the Bible. So those are the only two Nazarites we see, and obviously neither is an actual Nazarite.
Is Samson then more of a warning, do you think, against the Nazarites?
I think very much so. Yeah, I think so. And
that
also,
even with his super strength, he couldn't conquer,
right,
and the cutting of the hair was not the solution. And even though it brought him back, he got a little redemption toward the end.
Right, and it's also telling people, you're not supposed to become a lifelong Nazarite. You're a Nazarite for a couple of months. It's like a vow of chastity in other religions. It's like any other vow, but it's limited, I am not going to, like Lent. It's very like Lent for Christians. It's for a certain, I'm not going to eat meat for however long Lent is. I'm not sure, it's like 2 months maybe. And so that's the Jewish version. In fact, that Lent may have come from the Nazarite rules for all I know. I don't have to look that up. Excuse me. So
Is that like a cleansing or something? What was the point?
It is. It's kind of the point
like
is
cleansing.
The point was like, I've been partying too much. It's time to settle down. I want to show people that I can make a commitment to doing this and that I'm a better person. That's probably what it was used for at its best. It was probably also used by people saying, I'm a Nazarite. I haven't done this for 2 months. I'm better than you. It was probably used by that way too. That's not the intent, but that's probably what it was used as well. That's why you're not allowed to be a lifelong one. Although super strength would be kind of cool, I must admit, but really if I had my choice of superpower, it would be probably like super intellect or, flying. That would be a lot more fun.
Yeah, we were in Thailand a couple of years ago, and it's very interesting because it's almost an obligation that Thailand, being a very Buddhist country, it's almost an obligation for them to have their young kids go into the Buddhist monk for only a very short period of time.
Oh, really?
I believe it's 6 months, Larry.
Is it 6 months? Yeah.
6 months, because I was there. I remember that.
Become monks.
Yeah.
But most of them are there for like a temporary, it's almost like a Peace Corps kind of thing.
Nice.
They go in for a period of time and they come out and they go back into the real world. Not that they're not Buddhist, but I mean, they're not the Buddhists that you generally associate with the Buddhist monks and priests.
So, and again, for the Nazarite, we don't know if it was for young men or older men. It certainly feels like more of a younger man. I'm trying to straighten my ways or to prove that I'm a valuable community member or that I'm ready to get married. I don't know. So that possibly or would have been the reason for it. Or it could have been somebody's done some terrible things recently and I want to show people or absolve myself, some sort of Yom Kippur, something-ish thing. All right, so that is Ruth and Hannah. So next week, and I think I'm gonna double check next week, I apologize, we're gonna start at 11 because I have a meeting at 10 that I was invited to, I need to go to. So I apologize about that. So we'll go from 11 to 12 and we'll talk about Purim. We'll talk about the book of Esther and Purim. If we need another week, Purim is the next week, so we could do another week with it. Noel, you have a question?
Yeah, I want to say something to Terry. I want to say something to Terry.
Terry's right here. Go right ahead.
No, Terry, I'm so happy your brother is doing well.
Oh, me
I
too.
better.
It's like a miracle. It really is a miracle.
I am so happy for that. And
Thank
where's
you.
your little fluff ball kitty? Where's your
Oh,
little kitty?
he's on the sink right now.
Well,
Terry, I'm sorry, we didn't know what is happening with your brother. What is
my
happening with your
brother's
most of
brother?
all, and probably
Awesome.
because of
But-
Terry, he's recovered, and Terry's probably been a very big part, if not the biggest part of his recovery.
Yeah, he was in a coma for a while, Larry, in the hospital, and then he revived. He went to rehab, and before he was on a walker, now he can walk. We can go to the grocery store and just 100% better.
Wow, that's smart. Was it COVID related or
No, just
No?
a number of things.
a stroke of some sort or?
Actually drinking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, well, it's a
I
wonderful
didn't
story.
know.
Yeah.
We didn't speak for a while, and then I became Jewish, and I took the readings to heart, and we started talking, and I found out his son committed suicide. He's having a rough time, and so I've been helpful. I've been taking him to doctor's appointments, and thank you, Noel. He is doing so much better,
Yeah, that
I'm
is,
so happy.
and he's not drinking.
Happy.
yeah, that's awesome. So thank you again, Terry, and she, of course, we talked about it, but she is such a mensch, as we all know. Any other thoughts before we go?
Yes, Rabbi, you
Yeah.
mentioned that next week it'll be 11 o'clock.
Yeah, so I apologize for that.
Right. You might mention to Jennifer, at least it didn't work for me. When I went to the link that she gave on the temple, the link was corrupted. It would not go through.
Okay, I'll let her know that's a different link.
The manual numbers worked fine, but the link was no good.
I'll make sure to tell her that.
I mentioned one other thing, Rabbi, is I think tomorrow night, or no, tonight, I think it is the Bremen Museum, or no, not the Bremen Museum, it's the museum and it's the Rutgers University is doing their second part on Tevye, which are the Jews of Russia, basically.
Oh, great.
And the first part was very, very well done, and you can pick up the second and third part this week and next week. And in addition to that, I sent out another piece of information about the Meyerson Jewish Film Festival in New York. And I think she's showing, as part of the Jewish Film Festival, 11 films. And tremendous history of, basically modern Judaism all the way through Golda Meir and through Lieberman. And so each film is different, and it costs $50, but there's 11 films. And it might be interesting for us to watch some of those and maybe even discuss them as a group afterwards. And they'll be streaming, so you could see them for about 4 or 5 days. But it is a $50 charge per screen. So
well, let me make sure people understand what we're talking about. In ancient times, we would go to a movie theater and we pay money to watch the movie there. It was like $10. So 11 movies would have been $110. Now we're getting 11 movies for $50. So it's like half price.
And
so
if your wife watches it with you,
and your wife, and you can
That's
watch
really
it over and over again.
or your 3-year-olds, then
Now the screen is going to be, yeah, that's right. The screen is going to be smaller, so I suggest moving closer, and then the screen is bigger.
Larry, could you send the Tevye tonight, links for tonight?
Yeah, I'll try and find it again. It should be on the link for the CMI. If you go back to all of the CMI stuff I've been sending out.
Yeah,
and I apologize for sending out so much, but
send it out. I mean, the worst we can say is I don't want to do it. But also the Jewish Film Festival in Savannah is coming up.
Right.
That's going to be online. So check that out. That's the movies. And I'm listening. There's so many speakers, and I'm hopefully going to catch an Arthur Brooks presentation tomorrow night. And speaking for the national. It's a group that brings people together. I forgot. And Arthur Brooks wrote a really fabulous. He's a political writer. Actually, he's a conservative political writer, but probably one of my favorite political writers. I only know like 3. My wife knows like 300, but he's amazing. So, but yeah,
Rabbi,
yes, Rena.
The Savannah Did they tell you you paid for each film? Is that how it's working?
That is a good question. I don't know. They haven't sent us the stuff, or if they have, I haven't seen it.
No.
But I think it starts in the next couple of weeks. I don't know if you pay for all of it or for one of it, but I'll probably pay, I'll probably I may see as many as I can this year now, because it's usually so hard for me to go at nights with night meetings, but now I can do it at home. It'll probably be a lot easier.
I did
Maybe
send
you
out
can
another
find
link,
out.
by the, I did
Yeah, I
send
can
out
count.
another,
It's free.
I can probably
I
find
did-
out right now. Let me see here. I'll go to the Jewish Federation.
I did send out another link for the Maine Jewish Film Festival. Who knew that Maine would have one? That Eileen Goldberg sent me
Great.
for 2 free films. So look
Oh,
at those.
great. Yeah,
'cause
that'd be great.
Those are 2 pretty interesting films, very different kind of subject matter. And but take a look at those as well.
We know a Jew in Maine, Joey.
Yeah, send out the stuff because it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
you can't get to it all, but basically some of them involve streaming at different times. So you're pretty lucky. You can watch it at your leisure. And then they have a Q&A at a specific time. A lot of them, but most of them you have to register for. But the 2 films in Maine are free. And one of them, I guess they're both in commemoration of Black History Month. One is about the fellow who is the CEO of Sears, and his the work that he did together to fund a lot of Black schools. His donations. And the second one is a more modern one about a Black Jewish woman who stood on a street corner to basically try and mitigate the crime problem in her neighborhood. So it could be a very interesting film.
Well, it's so apropos because our refrigerator broke this morning, but we were so fortunate because I looked in and it has a labor. I had the number for the people who would fix it for us, and so we're going to take it to Sears. That was a joke.
There's no Sears.
I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rabbi, the Savannah Film Festival is free. They're going to be, obviously virtual. It starts February 28th, and I
All
think
right,
we're
perfect.
doing 6
So
films.
right after Purim.
Right, February 28th. It's free. You do have to register with the JEA.
You have to register for each one individually or for one?
That I don't
think so.
know.
I think each one
You
individually.
might have to do each film
I
individually.
think that's fair.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's great. And they do a really good job. The committee, at least through the years, has done a great job.
Rabbi,
And
you
the
watch
film- I'm
the
sorry.
film and then they have a discussion.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
what
great.
it is. Register, and the film is available for 72 hours
Oh,
Great.
for the discussion.
Yeah, a lot of them are doing that now, which is really, really good. It's very easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great because my kids go to bed at 8, so if it's at 7, I don't get to watch it.
Larry, when is the main film festival?
You have to check again. They're all kind of muddled in my mind, but they're all within the next week or so, I think. And again, it's a similar kind of thing where they allow, it's only 2 films, but they allow you to watch it over a 72-hour period, I believe. And then I forget when the discussion is.
And Flossie, also, the Savannah Film Festival is our main Jewish film festival. We don't have any other ones. That's
No.
just
Right.
that one. That was a joke also. Because the main, I was using main as MAIN.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I got a set. I'm doing comedy Saturday night. I better do better than this. Flossie.
Rabbi, I was
You need a better audience.
know when it's a joke and we'll laugh.
Thank
No.
you, Rabbi. That was a good one.
I have a great
Hold up
audience.
the sign laugh. You need a laugh sign.
That's a good idea.
The laugh.
All right. So
Audience is everything.
we have today we have the thing at 3. We will have the Passover spiel on Friday.
Purim.
Friday of the month. The Purim
Purim.
spiel, the last Friday of the month at 5:30. So if anybody's interested, we still have like a couple parts available. If anybody's, it's one practice and we're doing it obviously on Zoom. So if anybody wants to act, let me know. All right, safe day,
You too.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Always an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure. You guys are awesome. So have a
A lot
great
of fun.
day.
A lot of fun.
See
Thank
some of
you.
you in the next couple of days.